Greetings ladies and gents, and welcome to the batch video, for there is no epic lucha, only puns, from the website ReUpload. If you are new here, there is a link down below and up in the corner to the playlist which will start at chapter 1. This video contains chapters 115 to 117, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. If you do, please consider subscribing. Chapter 115. Vastly Giant Bridge. The misty bridge of the jungle was a thing out of a story. A rushing river below was hidden, the curling wisps of mist scattered across the bridge. Dio stepped on it as the jungle seemed to grow quiet around them. Davina, their guide, turned with a mysterious smile. I shall wait with anticipation for the results. She mused and leapt off the bridge into the mist below, the orange bird flapping after her, cackling. Kemi rushed to the edge, her cloud-like robes meddling with the mist, giving an almost sensual appearance. But she shook her head. I can't see anything, she told the group. Grim sighed. She's a frog. She's a frog. She's as comfortable in the river as she is on land, and there is her home. You don't need to worry. He pointed out with a roll of his eyes. Dio pointed before anyone else could speak. We're not alone, he warned. The group snapped their attention at the far end of the bridge that had mist so thick that it looked like a solid wall. The clouds of fog began to thin as the being noticed made them shy. A large, kneeling giant appeared in the shadow of the first, kneeling before the mist peeled back like a curtain, revealing a large, dark-skinned figure with muscles bigger than their own head. A leather wrap around to preserve his modesty. He stood with the leather hands across his chest, straining to the limit to contain the might of the frogman. He's big, Hamster whispered. The frog tilted his head back, black eyes looking them over. He pointed suddenly at the side of the bridge, in the direction of a point, a glimmering object that could be seen. A silver key. It was suspended far out, entangled by roots or by the handle. It dangled so dangerously close to vanishing into the mist below that made the group nervous just seeing it. Toward the key. A challenge. The giant mumbled. Grim looked about. I don't see a puzzle or an obstacle, he pointed out. The giant smiled, the smaller upturn of his lips. He threw something and clattered in the middle of the bridge. Everyone stared down at a well-carved staff. It was smooth from one end, seemingly polished by some oily substance, dried out to give it a lacquered shine. I am the challenge, the giant acknowledged. He pulled out a similar weapon and smashed the butt of it into the bridge, causing it to shake slightly. The key rattled almost musically as it teetered from one side to another of its perch. One challenger may approach to earn the key. I must be removed from the bridge for 5 seconds. Unnecessary power or antics will cause the key to fall. If someone goes for the key, it has its own defense. The giant said, his voice smooth and deep, like a deep well. Like what? Poppy asked. The river below ceased its rapid flows as something erupted high above the bridge in a rising flop, screaming as it gnashed its pincers together. Water cascading in its rainbow hue carapace. The thing vanished with an alarming crash below. Bob. The giant seemed to think I've explained everything. Grim seemed to choke. That thing, he muttered, face ashened. Kemi also looked torn between trauma and hesitant pleased hand wavering. Key is like a worm on a hook for a bigger worm, Vass commented, unaffected by the sight. Choose your warrior, the giant called out as he sat down, cross-legged, and waited patiently. Dio took a step forward, but Vass put a hand on his shoulder. May I? He asked politely. Dio blinked and then beamed. Of course you can. I believe in you. Dio stepped back. Grim frowned. Dio is the strongest of us all, he countered. Vass smiled as he passed his brown cap over to Dio for safekeeping. His hair, unnaturally smooth and flowing, framed his face. Perhaps too strong. My master has built me into a great self-restraint for my own power. Fail-safes in case I ever turned homicidal on him. He explained with a little bit of pride. Grim opened his mouth and then closed it. Can't argue with that, Poppy said and stepped back to clear out the line to indicate the end of the bridge. Vass bent down and picked up the staff. Vass has the power of heroism and friendship on his side, Leo warned the giant. Grim quickly spoke up. Not all of us are friends, but he also had a mild acquaintances, he added. Also, maybe a deeply hidden murderous rage, Poppy reminded. Kemi looked at them. Are you children okay? She asked the group with concern. Mostly, Leo is convinced animals can talk, and he just can't understand them due to the shape of their jaws. But Dio is just that kind of guy. Oh, and Grim once tried to pull a sword from a stone, and we found out his dad had stuck it there to plug a leak of the rock water, Amster admitted. Rocks don't have water, Kemi said confused, while Vass was walking towards the giant frog. You approach me, the giant rumbled as he stood. I cannot hit you from afar, Vass agreed with a polite smile. The giant suddenly moved and Vass raised his stick to meet the attack. The breach rattled. The force didn't seem to travel through Vass as one would expect. My master once traveled to deep-throat sirens in the Green Sea. I'm quite used to possessing sonic attacks at various frequencies in my body. These weapons are solid, and the noise they make may strike together would be alarming and potentially cause one to fall over. I cannot risk losing the key, Vass said as he pushed back as hard as he could. The giant budged just an inch. Ew, Poppy said as Kemi touched her throat with wide eyes. Sirens, aren't they the seducers of sailors? Ammonster pondered. Grim snorted. That's wishful thinking of ugly pirates and sailors who have to explain why they have no cargo on their dock. Sirens can be traced back to meaning binders or such. I studied them when I wanted to be a famous sailor. They use sound and music to paralyze foes or utterly decimate ships if their choir is big enough. Seduction is just rumors. A siren would kill you if you implied that they didn't anything like that actually lure men in. The male ones, in particular. Grim grinned. Vass pushed back and tried to slip under the frog's pole to slam into his side, hoping to knock him off the bridge. The frog grabbed the weapon and instead flung Vass high into the air. If he lands on the bridge, the key will be lost, Kemi cried. Vass turned and landed with a grace on the bridge's railing. The bridge didn't move. The roots holding the key are tethered to the ground. These walls must remain solid to avoid knocking everyone off their feet with merely crossing it. I am in greater danger of falling, but oddly, in the most secure place to fight. Vass smiled as he brushed a lock of his hair out of his face. The frog joined Vass on the ledge as the single leap. Then let us spar on equal grounds, the giant said calmly. Vass lowered himself, holding the staff so that it held at an odd diagonal angle. The giant held his horizontally with both hands. The jungle was silent for a moment. Then the clashing of wood thunderous and furious. Giant moved with a swing suited for a great sword. Vass nimbly leaned one way or another, leaving the blows graze past missing him by inches. The frogman's attack pushed the golem back where the wall began to thin out. Vass suddenly narrowed his eyes and went perfectly still. Kemi gasped in horror as the giant's pole went straight through the side of his arm. The sheen on Vass's body took on what was to reveal not that of trick of light, but the pole met Vass's skin. The sound of wood meeting wood again sounded. The giant was rocked back by the sheer recoil of the resistance that he wasn't expecting. Vass lost the weird shine, and the grainy wood material sank back beneath the skin. He lashed out, not with the blunt hits using the side of his staff, but the sharp jabs that felt flat-end. 6 or 7 such jabs went into the giant frog's stomach. Dio cheered loudly for the golem, the giant's frog slipping backward, giving Vass the room he needed to step forward with his staff, swinging it around his body in a blur of arc of wood. The frog was not the master of the bridge for no reason. He took the hit on his neck directly, his bulging muscles doing their best to meet the challenge, as the frog pulled one leg towards his chest, narrowing his own eyes back at Vass. He then pressed his head against the side, trapping Vass's staff between his head and the meaty shoulder. Vass wasted a precious second trying to tug it before the giant's leg shot out. Vass sailed off the bridge and into the misty abyss below. Silence reigned as the giant frog rubbed his neck. He turned to encourage the next challenger, but froze as a strange sound began to echo back. It was the sound of a rock being torn out and splashing heavily into the water, of something creaking. Whoa. Dio stared at Vass, flung himself back onto the bridge, lashing tree roots piercing out of the back of his dirty white shirt like extra limbs. 4 seconds, I assume I get the same time limit, the golem asked blankly as the roots looked like liquid spider legs in the midst. The giant turned and answered by throwing Vass's staff back. Vass began to twirl it between all 4 of his extra roots and hands. The staff was almost impossible to track. However, the frog merely met the whirling attack that came at his blind spot from the right. The giant blocked it without even looking. I've fought spiders before. I'm used to many limbs. The giant smiled, and then he leapt up high, his staff pointing down like a spear. But if we are resorting to tricks, I don't need to win. The frog called down as he fell. I only need to make you lose. Vass rushed to meet him as Grim asked something casually. Did anyone else know that Vass was a tree spider thing? He asked aloud. Dio thought about it. No, but I wish I did. That's so cool, he said, dancing in a little excitement. Mr. Japes really stuffed a lot into him, Poppy commented. I wonder if he comes with snacks, Ammonster pondered. Kemi was dry-heaving. She had no real comment. Delta swallowed slightly. She couldn't even muster a joke or something to snark at. This was too serious. The doors deeper in floor 3, unconquered land, shook once with a mighty rumble. The Delta rune of protection flickered as it tried to handle the strain. The gargoyles did their best to hold the statued forms against the door, adding bands for extra strength to the door. But it wasn't just pure strength attacking the door. The dark power was emanating the attack. Delta focused on the door and felt the stale feeling of the stagnant pull of power. She focused on it, and it was greeted with an image. Down the hall, over the army of bone and dripping flesh, past the flies of gluttony, to the throne room where a little petite girl in a large frilly dress sat on an ornate dusty chair. The face of a cherub surrounded by golden curls with a tiara and silver enlaced with a single ruby. The face of the picturesque princess, if not for the fact that half of her face was gone to reveal a black skeleton with runes banded on the bone. Let's play, big sister Delta. She beckoned, her voice that of someone who had not spoken in a long time, and the image shattered, and Delta pulled back, her non-existent flesh crawling. Lovely. Creepy girls gone necromancer, just what the place needed. I assume we just met with Princess Mahari, or Princess Marrow. New asked, focusing on the blue screen in the door. Something about the skeleton side of the girl's face. Inside the eye socket was... something was moving. The fallen brother of the cult. It was finally meeting her head-on, and Delta was worried that she wasn't going to be strong enough to protect the village. Her hand clenched. No, Delta was strong enough. Let's play, Marrow. My rules, your game, she whispered, and the attack on the door stilled, as if hearing this before resuming with gusto. You don't have rules. Can't cheat if I don't have them. Delta agreed and began to pull up menus open. She didn't have much time to make her elite squad ready to fend off an army. And it all started where it started. With mushrooms. No, get the mushrooms ready. Marrow likes to play with death. I'll bring something that doesn't have a death in its cycle. Delta pointed and Nu shivered. Mushrooms and undead. A war of no one needed, but it's getting anyway. Nu muttered with this, but Delta was already flying into action. She had 2 rooms to visit and a special mushroom to create. If a foe was a Princess Marrow, then she was the queen of fungi. Delta would embrace her demons to keep her children and the village safe. She'd even wear the damn mushroom cap into battle if it meant helping her friends. She just hoped that no one had cameras. Delta might have to seal herself away for 100 years in shame. End of chapter. Chapter 116. Whining. If Delta was going to be making something to tackle the armies of the unliving dead, she couldn't just pop monsters. Her third floor was quite full, and as much as Delta tended to ignore certain rules, this one was mostly solid. For now. So, if Thee was being honest, Delta was going to have to go the way of her nightmares. Unending, not monsters. Mushrooms, growing everywhere, were considered decorations. Decorations sounded harmless until Delta reminded herself that her decorations exploded. Well, they almost smelled good and shot laser beams and generally did whatever they wanted, but the important thing was that Delta had unlimited usage of decorations. As long as they didn't attack or block the way of the vital room, then Delta would reasonably and calmly spam them unchecked. She checked on the kids and found Vass exploding with tentacles and Giant doing some monk kung fu impression. She stared for a long moment before she moved on, shaking her head. The things you saw in the dungeon? Seriously? She flew to the secret garden where her shrooms acted against the nature that they were developed automatically with barely any oversight. Delta could just hang a white and red umbrella logo in the corner, and the effect would be almost the same as a certain evil corporation. The development speed of the new flowers and herbs had slowed down overall, though, since you couldn't endlessly produce new strains without some major issues or needing a heavy dose of fire. She focused on the room and tried something she had never done before. Delta did her best to hold the images of two different rooms at the same time. Delta held the secret room and the mushroom grove on the first floor side by side. She used her dungeon senses to draw two lines, one from each room, moving together the space between the floors. The feeling was intensely fierce, and she hoped that it didn't backfire. Sis felt that, on one hand, Delta was a favorite amongst the many dungeons. Every day there was a new event, always new ideas, new directions, new thoughts, and Sis loved it. On the other hand, the console of light magical screens exploded and sparks were sent everywhere as mushrooms grew out of the console, breaking apart devices that had taken very long time to make and sustain. Sis sipped on a cup of tea as she watched. Delta tended to have no brakes on her ride. She was an airship that went higher and higher, the boat that chugged on and on, a mushroom that grew and grew. Sis was used to the explosions now. Being an avatar of the one true sister, she had been given a limited amount of her real self's thinking space at the start. This was normal across dungeons. Now, she had been allocated more processing power and a bigger room. The amount of things that Delta broke did seem like something to worry about. Sis saw something after a moment, causing her to not fear this new development. The mushrooms spread their thin threads into a singular unit, weaving in and out of the mess of defunct magic wiring and runic devices. Their threads began to connect where the wires were exposed. The mushroom caps replaced the buttons, and the spongy material filled the missing space. Decay was the reusing of old fuel and new growth. Sis saw this now. She could destroy this, revert everything to the old ways, but Sis and her brother knew that was a dead end. Delta was the key. Delta was the whole reason that they'd even tried this. Sister and brother were such silly old godlings, but most people's reckonings, and the mistakes they had caused, the pain they had experienced trying to fix their problems, which would now be given new problems. They tried so hard to care for the life that they'd made possible. Sometimes they worried that they were becoming accustomed to being gods. Brother was especially against the religion in their name. He got annoyed and tended to curse such buildings with taxes or infest them with goblins. Sis agreed with the sentiment, but more quietly. They were people too. They were just doing their best. However, Sis knew that they were stuck in the old methods. They really did need some young blood to show them some new ideas. Someone who could think outside the box. She giggled as the mushrooms began to light up and hum as they started to mimic the various machines. Delta leaked happiness to whomever was willing to just listen. Sis would protect us. This world desperately needed a little bit more laughter. Delta brought more than just a little. The room snapped in between the floors, and a single new room was formed. Delta gasped and then clapped her hands in delight. I did it! She cheered and did a little best fly in a new space to see the result. a room with no entrance or exit, but which drew upon the functions of two different rooms, the secret garden and the mushroom grove. The secret grove. Delta stared around the cave-like room and tried to open a window, but the message appeared. Upgrades and progression are based on parent rooms. No upgrades present here. Ah, Delta could see that being fair trade for ignoring the room count and using cross-floor cooperation. She focused her attention on the new windows and screens opened. Please choose base parent for the new breed. End result will always be a mushroom. Delta cracked her fingers and did the first stroke, and she selected gut rot. The list of potential matches and effects began to unfold before her. Delta swallowed as she adjusted her tie. I'm just a tough core doing tough things, she growled at the best army voice. Surely, if she did this carefully and weighed the pros and cons, she noticed a button at the end of the screen. Random selection. Delta stepped back staggered as she panted. What evil must I fall to? She demanded of no one, then looked around for a familiar blue screen. She pursed her lips. Maybe the first time for luck, she reasoned. She blew out a sigh after a moment. I'm alone. Who am I trying to convince? Gotcha time. She giggled and pushed the button and watched the options flew past like a slot wheel. Something cute, something cute, something cute, she chanted, and then the wheels began to slow, revealing a single image that was... Fudge, Delta said, voice sounding shaken. The gut rod match showed a picture of a curvy tree. Wyan. That's not good. Giant was not someone who acclaimed to have many fights under his belt. Besides the spider invasion and the scuffling with Rail, the only major fight had been against Quiz, and that fight had been more verbal than physical. This child, this being, was proving to be his greatest foe yet. He swung his staff around with a massive frame, snapping away 3 of the 4 tentacles made from the soft green plant material. The owner, Vass, moved in to swipe his leg hard. One wrong move and into the river they would go. The true challenge of the match was, of course, the fact that Vass had a means to return to the bridge, even if Giant did manage to knock him off. Those tentacles would have to be disabled. Giant moved in with his collar and flung himself over his head. Giant reached out and snatched one of the snake-like vines and yanked, pulling the golem in hard. He flipped the vine over Vass's head and under the other vine. The thing that went wild, tangled just as Giant had hoped. Vass made a palm strike to the chest and Giant gave a grunt of pain as the sheer strength was enough to match his own. He skidded back and along the rail and Vass eyed his 2 tangled vines with a curious expression. Logical, he concluded, and reached for the tangled mess. But Giant was on him in a second. He would give the boy no time to right himself. He used his staff to vault up high into the air, like a pole jumper, spinning to plant his staff into the shoulder of the boy. If he didn't dodge, then the worst that would occur would be a broken shoulder. Giant wasn't aiming to murder the children in his proper debut with Mother's Bridge Guardian. Vass decided to do something odd, however. He leapt back onto the bridge right into the center. The bridge shook a little, and the stone binding roots that formed around the foundation of the bridge trembled on impact. Giant watched curiously as Vass turned back to his group and seemed to pray to himself silently. No words were heard, and his lips moved softly. Giant could definitely guess that he was trying to communicate with his team, but he was not doing it in a way that Giant could see. Giant stomped hard after Vass, the bridge shaking with each step. Vass turned and used his remaining tentacle limbs, and he shot straight up into the air with an extreme force. Giant followed, knowing that the key would tumble out of the grasp should they both land, and he would win. Vass turned his plant tentacles to latch onto the foe suddenly. Giant was so surprised that he didn't react in time, as Vass slithered around the giant's body and onto his back. As my master would say, you've fallen into my grasp for the next 100 years. Cry for me. Vass stated pleasantly as with that he began to spin them backwards, causing them both to dive towards the bridge, head first. But the key, Giant yelled as he tried to break free, flexing with all his might. The challenge is that no one can step on the bridge but one. However, if there is no one on the bridge, then they can rush for the key before it falls, no? Vass added the bridge rushed towards them, dizzyingly fast. They smashed into the bridge and it reacted explosively. The edges of the railing ascended and the impact crater caused the bridge to fold in on itself. The giant closed his eyes as the mist rushed past. His head ached, but his skull was tough. He could just barely see the key being thrown high into the air as the roots let go. The sight of Dio leaping into the distance and catching it made Giant sigh. He turned to Vass and let him go. The golem looked sad as if the part of the journey had come to an end. Well fought. Giant praised and grabbed one of Golem's arms. He twisted his body around and threw the golem back up to the valley and high enough to be caught by the cheerful red-headed boy, Dio. Giant smiled as the mist gave off a scream of someone named Wilhelm, or so Mother said. The river, the second home, caught him, resulting in a huge splash. He floated on the surface to let himself be carried along for a time, just enjoying the cool water and the mist. What a fight! Giant could only hope with all of them would be so grand. The bridge would regenerate and rebuild itself. Giant had no worries there. He bobbed along for some time before he figures in the mist, a dark foreboding shape gently pushing his barge along the dark river, like the spectre of a ferryman coming to a lost soul. Delta's River Rescue Service at your service. My name is Rail. Do you have any allergies or injuries that need to be addressing? Called the cheerful buff frog, pushing his log along with his trident. Rail, I'm a frog. I can swim. Giant sighed as a piece was disturbed. Rail huffed. I was hoping to rescue some humans, but you had to be a nice guy. Ah, well, climb on. We can go play some poker with the crabs. They're in the lead with 29 wins, but I think we might finally understand the rules soon. Rail said brightly. Giant just snorted and sat on the log while Rail hummed like a romantic boat driver, pushing them back towards the waterfall. Explain why I threw up this thing, Giant asked, voice ever so gentle. Delta scuffed her feet in the grass around the dryad tree. I accidentally you science, Delta mumbled. Wyan pursed her lips and then pointed at one of the thorny branches. I just orally projectiled a mushroom, she pressed. Delta's eyed the now-rooted shroom. It was a weird-looking thing. The guide-rod YM hybrid was an odd duck at first glance. The pale brown cap looked swirly like a varnished wood. The stalk was bright red with leaves hanging off at random intervals. The scent was, like perfume, a faint floral thing. It was a pretty mushroom, but, like YM, the beautiful appearance had a darker nature. Delta ordered one of the blood rabbits to poke it again, and the thing unfolded. From the tip of the cap, two thin coils of barbed thorns wrapped around it, unleashing like some kind of claymore mine, spinning the garrote anything that walked past it. Delta was glad that the bunny was fast before the grass, the soil, and even the air was punished cruelly by the mushroom as it launched out and its whips as its thorns rocketed like shrapnel. YM blinked as her own wooden form easily deflected the projectiles. It's called YM's Temptation. I want my name on it now, YM said, voice eager. Delta stared at her. YM looked dainty and feigned innocence. It's my mushroom child, she reminded Delta. Delta rolled her eyes. You're going to be happy then. There's literally like 30 different combinations with your name on it. Delta pulled up her list. In fact, like the included Maestro, Mushy, Missy, even let Delta combine things that she'd recently found in the laboratory. Slime mushrooms. Delta could make slime mushrooms for chaos' sake. The issue was that the production time for them would all take forever. Delta had no idea how to filter out what would potentially make the most impactful combo on skeletons. What eats dead things and bone really well? Delta mused aloud as she paced. YM spoke up, distracted as she played with a new child. Men, she commented. Delta paused, turned and eyed her flatly. YM coughed. Pigs, I mean. Pigs eat almost anything, she clarified. Delta opened a menu and scrolled. Sure enough, Maury and Bacon were listed as potential parents. Piggy shrooms? Unholy eatings of forces of fungus and animal kingdoms combined. Delta decided that if she was going to beat up some undead child, she might as well do it with riding a pig mushroom to war. She began to make a hungry army. End of chapter. Chapter 117. The Buzz About Shrooms. Without a bridge, the group had to decide whether to backtrack to where the river was narrower. Mass had suggested tearing down one of the trees to make their own bridge, but Koth, Kemi, and Dio refused. That's just rude, Kemi said. The trees didn't hurt anyone, Dio frowned. Bobby just pointed at the overhanging branches. Then we can just swing on the vines, yeah, she muttered. Everyone followed her finger, the thin green vines dangling above the river. Without the bridge, the gap really did seem huge, but one by one everyone began to grin. Except Kemi. In other dungeons, there'd be snakes, trapped chains, curling vine grabbers. Too flimsy. She listed quickly with her hands waving in panic. She brushed down her cloudy robe where her legs were just visible. Delta wouldn't do that. She'd have it if you swing the vines in a certain way. They produce a musical note and then a song, and it rains rainbows. Or something. Hammonster snorted, Grim grumbled, and swept his gaze into the jungle. Or a summon of mimes, he gritted out. From the shadows unseen, Davina's chuckling could be heard. No time to waste! Adventure forth! Dio proclaimed and began to scramble up a tree like a crab monkey. Kemi's nervousness grew, but before she could do much, the vine lowered within reach of her. She blinked and saw no one else had gotten this reaction. To respect people and their modesty in this dungeon, Davina said calmly as she came to help Kemi tie the vine around her arm like a tight knot. Oh, Kemi stuttered, going pink, and the vine began to carry her across as if she were no heavier than a cloud, her robe suggested. She touched down as the rest of the group grabbed onto their own vines and were crossing the space. Wahoo! For glory! Thank you for the ride, Jungle Vine. I'm too edgy to enjoy this more than a little. Exciting noises, yeah. Kemi covered her mouth as a smile burst forth. The group was simply too bizarre to be real at times. Delta raised her hands into the air. It lives! She howled into the abyss in between the floors. Nu was behind her. What have we become? Delta gave him a hard look. Hard dungeons are making hard choices. We need this evil to protect those we love, she reminded as the monster in front of them rose. The beast was about a foot in height. The mushroom cap looked soft and pink, with all four little stubby legs that made a snuffle about, with a large big snout in front. It sniffed, and then the little mouth with twine-buck teeth opened up under the snout to eat a random experimental herb. Delta felt, just a little bit, that the thing wasn't exactly, terrifying in conventional views. But its menu description would breed terror into all people. Pigglecap, a harmless mobile mushroom that wanders about consuming any discarded trash or items. When fed directly by someone, it oinks a song of thanks. This is a critter. How do you go out to make something dangerous and do the complete opposite? Nu's box jingled in disbelief and Delta sagged in failure. I don't know. I thought the mushroom and pigs would give me a screaming green spore bios or something, she admitted, and then she perked up. I didn't check its upgrades, she said excitedly and brought up the menu quickly. Pigglecap, critter. Give a rosy cheeks 1 DP. Add curly tail 1 DP. Make it toot after eating too much. Sounds cute 1 DP. Make it ticklish 1 DP. Actually, this is turning out to be quite funny. Make something else. Delta glared at Nu with a scrunched up expression. I'm a dangerous dungeon, she warned before she purchased all the upgrades for the Pigglecap grew even cuter. Delta had to admit she kinda loved it. Nu brought up the crossbreeding aspect of the pre-selected blood curdler. Now, if your experience is correct, you just need to hit the big shiny button that's labeled random, and we should have a dangerous weapon. It's a undead that don't have blood. Delta remained in changing it to Starlight. Her finger hovered over the button, but then she withdrew it. Gotcha was a bad habit, but in this case, when she was told to push it, Delta didn't want to. For the love of all of that, I'll do it. Nu clicked the button with the second parent panel began to spin. Delta stared as it came to a slow stop. Nu was speechless. Delta was too. The image showed the Pigglecap. The menu appeared to show the creation was already done. A second similar Pigglecap burst into the secret grove soil and began to sniff about. Delta stared as this one was slightly more red than pink. She brought up the menu for the new creature. Black Hole Hog, unique single critter. This creature stores all items consumed in a pocket space inside its stomach. When enough mass has been crushed together, it releases a cosmic bang. Estimated time until stomach reaches full capacity, 999 plus years. Delta opened her mouth before she could say anything. New screen flashed, and the little piggy was reduced to dust with a surprised oink. Best we do that before you get attached and give it a character development. The screen explained and Delta sighed. She was relieved that the ticking pig bomb was no longer an issue, despite how cute it was. She glanced at the upgrade menu for it to see if she could make it safe. Most were the same that had been the same idea. Reduce the needed time for the Big Bang by 1,000 years, 5,000 DP. Delta shivered and put the giant bee along with the symbol of holy water. She could mix items, but she had so much junk in the menu that would take days to fully navigate. She cranked the lever. The room groaned before the new mushroom appeared. The mushroom grew on a tree in a weird hexagon pattern that gleamed silver. Delta prodded them with her power to cause them to do something. All 5 of the hexagons flashed, with the surface rocketed forward with a spray of steam and heat. The stingers hidden underneath flew forward with the silver heads attached. When they smashed into the wall, they exploded into a steaming mist of holy water. Holy stinger missiles, Delta whispered. Stinger? Stu cut himself off as a visible groan that shook his screen. A bee joke, really? I thought it was funny when I made them, Delta mumbled. Nu looked ready to rant when he cut himself off and then slowly began to speak. Delta, what other funny joke combinations spring to your mind? Delta put her hands to her chin. I thought of a few, but I'm trying to be serious here, so I didn't go for them. The stingers were just to make me feel better, she confessed. The screen and her friend leaned in and said something that scared Delta. I want to see your jokes. The punnier, the better. Truly, the dungeon had gone mad. Delta nervously began to select the next combination. The sight before them was beautiful. A large, colorful pools of honey that smelled spicy, sweet, fresh, and inviting. Swarms of bees moved with a purpose around the large stone pillars that seemed to tower the giants over the group. Kemi felt like she had stumbled into some untouched paradise as honey flowed like waterfalls into the smaller pools, causing new flavors and scents to rise up. From several stone pillars, the honey ran slowly down some unseen plumbing that kept the honey from congealing in their pools. The buzz of the swarm was in a tempo of high notes and then low trills, followed by cheerful calls. Several workers brought in fruits and flowers that were delivered to the tallest tower of them all. This tower was decorated in a solid honey gemstones and had the purest golden honey flowing from it. From this tower, the biggest bee Kemi had ever seen landed before them. The bee was bigger than a person, and its stinger could have been carved sword. It buzzed a few times and waited. Everyone shared a look, except Grim. Adventurers, we're here to explore, maybe get a key, he said, bored. Kemi turned to him, surprised. You can understand bee speech? She asked in awe. He's being pretty clear. Everyone talks in this dungeon. Frogs can speak, birds can speak. Why can't bees speak? He replied defensively. The bee buzzed and Grim nodded slowly. He said his name is Buzz Buzzy Buzz, and he can get the queen. We can take one of the rock cups and enjoy the free honey sampling while we wait. Grim continued to translate. Dio's eyes sparkled. What's his name? He pointed at a random bee passing. The bee buzzed. Bzzzt Buzzy Bee, Grim said, already frowning. Dio pointed at another. Buzzing Buzzbuzzed. Another. Lord Buzzington. Yeah, I heard that right. Dio lowered his finger. Grim has the coolest power, he said in the deepest envy. Kemi had to admit that she wished she could talk to giant murderous-looking bees who offered complimentary honey drinks. The bee took off and the rock cups looked carved for people much larger hands. Still, Kemi went over with the soft blue honey pool, and the bee took a cup and folded it for her as she failed to roll her sleeves up. He buzzed kindly, and Kemi bowed back. She tried the honey for a long sip, and things were just fine. She started to hear her hand and wiggle her fingers. She had meaty thing grabbers. How had she never realized this? The bees around seemed to eye her, for they gently buzzed her over to the purple pool. Bees! They were so fluffy. She hugged one with its fluffy. It seemed to be accept the motion as Kemi was in heaven. Bees were just big poofy dogs with ouchy butts. What's wrong with her? Poppy asked calmly as she finished the red honey sample. Kemi giggled as Poppy's ears began to leak steam. I'm communing with the ouchie butts and their fluff, she whispered, and Poppy winced at the volume. This honey is mostly untested on human consumption. Davina, the guide, appeared as if conjured. She eyed Kemi with amusement before gesturing to the purple honey. This is detox honey. It'll mostly cure anything in this jungle that bites, pinches, or stings, she explained. Kemi giggled and fell face first into the pool. She emerged a second later, gasping and spluttering. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to ruin the honey, she cried, and Davina scooped her out as the second giant frog burst into the clearing. Crimson shorts and buff physique made Kemi stare. I sensed drowning people, he panted. Davina had her side stiffened and then casually turned to face blank. Ah, Rail, do you always come running when people fall into less than solid matter? Davina asked casually. Kemi suddenly felt a bit nervous, but she had no idea why. Rail, the male frog, puffed out an impressive chest. Always, he promised. Davina just smiled at that, but that's when the swarm stopped. The buzzing that had become so easily background music abruptly stopped. The sudden silence was jarring, and Kemi stumbled again. The entire swarm of bees had all landed and gone still. From the biggest tower a bee emerged. Not the biggest or the most dangerous looking, but this bee had something no other had. There was a power to her. She used it like a perfume, owned it like a possession, and used it like an accessory. This bee had more curves to her than most, and her posture had the sway to it that someone who moved elegantly. In air or land, then there was the ornate crown that she wore. Welcome! The voice that emerged was not harsh buzz or a garbled mix, but a breathy, soft song. The queen could speak, and she seemed eager to show it. I am the Queen Mother, the guiding hand, Queen Elizabeth, the first of her name, the royal daughter of Delta, the mother, yes, of my mother. You may also call me Queen Lizzie. She pronounced some of her words, betraying her natural tone and sensual buzzing. Dio waved. Hello, you have a very nice crown, he announced. The bee swarm seemed to grow stiller, and the queen touched one leg to the crown in question. She seemed to take a moment to respond. You have a nice soul, pure as my honey. She complimented back before she stretched out her arms. Today we will begin the challenge that is our duty. We are not a swarm, but a queen. We are a key keeper and a challenge. Before us is the first group of challenges. Today is our day. She called to her children before, and all the pools of honey began to drain. The rumbling in the earth made Kemi stumble again, and the biggest stone pillar, the Queen's Tower, began to gush in all directions, and sides many hues of honey, and caused the rock to glow in light. At the very top, a single golden honey gem became transparent. Inside was a faint shadow of a key. The group was all stared at the Queen lifted into the air. Honey of help or hindrance, rock of strength or trap, reach the top and earn my favor, the Queen said, and then the swarm all buzzed as one. Then the swarm took to the air before they began to fly in a circle around the stone pillar, obscuring the top and making any direct path with flight or some conjuring spell that would simply yank the key to them impossible. Don't lick the blue stuff, it'll make you high, Kemi said in a whisper. Also, avoid the green, Hamster added. Everyone looked at him, and he stared at the sky. What does it do? Kemi asked, feeling the dread in her stomach. Hamster blinked. Nothing. It just tastes like old sock, he explained. Ha! I wash all my old socks, so don't fear that. Dio grinned and took off the tower. His logic is backwards, but he's got a good heart, Davina said, bemused. Kemi could say the same about the dungeon. And I thought this one would make me giggle, Delta said happily, as she chose one of her bats from the gargoyle spawn and one of her gargoyles. The result grew from the stone wall of the room and loomed like any tiny ledge. Delta activated it, and the thing detached from the wall and landed with enough force to half bury itself in the soil. Then it turned soft and spongy before it flapped its wings back to the stone wall, becoming rock hard once more. We can put them in the jungle and be home for bats as well, so that they can be eaten the night. Delta beamed. Nu looked at the sheer chaos in the room as mushrooms of all shapes, sizes roamed, exploded, stabbed, melted, consumed, combined, and twitched. No, I'm repressing. This was your idea. He twitched again. I am also repressing the blame. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this batch video. If you wish to support the author or this channel, the links are down below. And, as always, I'll see you in the next chapter. Have a good one. Cheers.